Russian colonel tied to Putin's draft effort killed himself at boss's desk, widow.
A high-ranking Russian colonel who played a role in President Vladimir Putin's partial mobilization efforts executed himself with 5 gunshots to the chest in his commander's office after allegedly being set up to take the fall for some of the problems plaguing the invasion of Ukraine, according to his widow. Colonel Vadim Boiko, 44, deputy head of the Makariv Pacific Higher Naval School in Vladivostok, Russia, was found dead on November 16 from multiple gunshot wounds in what has been described as a suicide. Just days after her husband's death, Yulia Bioko wrote an open letter to Putin, asking him to take a personal interest in the investigation into the death of her husband, whom she described as a patriot of his motherland, a true officer and a professional in his field. The 5-page typed letter was dated November 20, but the local news outlet News Vladivostok only published it Sunday. According to Yulia's letter, in mid-September, around the time Putin rolled out a plan to call up 300,000 reservists, her husband was put in charge of the intake and housing of new draftees at the naval school. From then on, the widow said, her husband spent most of his nights at work and struggled with numerous logistical issues, but received no support from his superiors. At one point, according to Yulia, Boiko realized that he was being set up as a fall guy for all the failures and shortcomings. Later, Boiko was tasked with repairing military vehicles that were slated to be sent to Ukraine, and also preparing the newly mobilized draftees for combat. But the officer quickly ran into major problems, namely, that the equipment was unfit for service. You would agree that if military equipment that has been used for years as a museum exhibit is now being handed to Boiko to be sent to the front, he cannot with the sweep of one hand fix the mistakes made earlier by someone else, the letter read. Boiko confronted his direct supervisor, head of the naval school Counter-Admiral Oleg Zurevlev, but instead of tackling the fatal issues, according to Yulia, her husband's boss reassured him that everything will be fine, then took a sick leave and dumped all responsibility on his deputy. Yulia Bioko said her husband was overwhelmed with stress, had suffered from insomnia for a month and lost more than 33 pounds. In mid-November, military commissioners tasked with investigating draftees' complaints threatened the colonel with criminal charges and fines totaling 100 million rubles, $1.6 million, for the faulty military equipment. 2 days later, Boiko arrived at the naval school, entered his boss's office, sat at his desk and used his own service weapon to shoot himself in the chest 5 times. His widow noted that her husband did not aim at his head to end it all as soon as possible, but rather committed a self-execution meant to send a signal to Putin that there is a disaster happening, that something must be done, that the motherland is in danger. Russian Colonel Vadim Boiko's widow said her husband committed suicide by shooting himself 5 times in the chest because he was fed up and threatened. Yulia Bioko, Center, wrote an open letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin, explaining the circumstances of her husband's death. The widow said Boiko was being set up to be the fall guy for an array of failures involving Putin's drafts and antiquated military equipment being sent to Ukraine. Yulia said her husband killed himself in his boss's office at work to send a signal to Russian leaders that there is a disaster happening. The widow called on Putin to oversee the investigation into her husband's death.